Welcome into the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Pre, Merrick Scopel, Jared Mack on the show. Welcome to April. Welcome to Monday. Tomorrow, all three of us will be at spring football practice as it resumes for the Oregon Ducks. But today, we will discuss the mailbag. We'll open up the mailbag. We've got a couple questions. A lot of it football focused, which I think we were all kind of expecting.
Yeah, no, we kind of ran through our end of year reviews on both basketball programs over the last week, and so the focus turns to football. Perhaps the more uplifting of the options as well, I should note, considering that both basketball programs had a pretty disappointing season, and spring football is always kind of a fun, optimistic time. But we're going to start with a recruiting question here from a frequent question asker at Robbie Parness, who asks, with the visitor list for the spring game continuing to grow, and by the way, the spring game, April 29th, which top 100 prospects do you give Oregon the best shot at landing? Also, who might not be realistic but is the highest on your wish list other than Raiola? Hashtag Autzen Audibles. Thank you, Robbie, for leading the show today. Matt, I'm going to kind of throw it your way. Just to start, what do we know about the spring game, possible visitor lists? Kind of, do we have a sense of the size of the scope of it, and kind of maybe some names to know?
Yeah, I think this list is going to expand. It's already somewhere around 15 or so guys that have confirmed to be here. Double digits, I'll say, to confirm to be here right now. A lot of them are 2025, 2026. There are 2024 players on campus. I think the biggest guy to get and is more so to keep, and that's Anderson, the receiver, 4-star from Southern California. He's flirted with Colorado a little bit. I think he's been visiting some other schools as well this past month. He's an elite dude. And so to make sure that he stays committed is going to be a big one. I think another guy that's going to be here, but not for the spring game. It's the week before is Luke Moga. We talked about like last week, quarterback. This is maybe the highest rated guy that Oregon's got a really legit chance with. He's from the state of Arizona. He's kind of blown up this winter, this past spring. You know, he's a 3-star quarterback. It wouldn't surprise me though in the slightest that, you know, if he shows up in fall for high school football season and he's a 4-star. So I know that's kind of going away from spring game type deal, but I think just the month of April in general, you're going to see a huge group of guys roll through. Maybe if I had to pick somebody that's going to be here this week, that particular weekend that is visiting Oregon, I would probably go with Elijah Rushing. He's a 5-star. He's a top 10 player in the country. He's from the state of Arizona, from Tucson. I don't necessarily think Oregon is like the driver here, but they're in the picture. They're in the mix. He's got everybody after him, though. But you could go a long ways with a recruiting class and having a chance at a top 10 class if you can get a big 5-star to join the fold early. No idea if he's going to make a decision early. I doubt it. But put yourself in position with Elijah Rushing, who's been to Oregon a couple times. Do that, and you've gone a long ways towards securing that top 10 class.
Rushing was my guy. He was the clear number one answer for me, other than Dylan Raiola, who would be a fantastic addition to the class. But same thing with Rushing, like every school in the country. Well, Steve Wiltfong reported a couple of weeks ago that he was coming, but I'm not sure. I don't know. What do you have, Matt? You have something on that?
No, I've just said that I thought I read somewhere that it was like he's being skeptical now if he's going to finish his visits. I thought that was what Steve reported. Maybe I just read it wrong as if he's still going to visit those schools. But I thought I saw Steve saying like he may not even finish his visits now. Regardless, I don't think he's in play for Oregon. Like, seriously.
No, I don't really think he's in play. I think Oregon will certainly give their best efforts, but I don't think that that's going to be a realistic possibility. Rushing, obviously, is one of the best defensive line prospects in the country. He's been a guy that Oregon has recruited for multiple years now under Mario Cristobal and now Dan Lanning. You watch his film; he's big, he's explosive, he's extremely athletic for a guy his size. He's also a West Coast kid, or West Coast quote unquote, as a guy out of Arizona. So I think that's a huge perk for Oregon. That for one time you have this big old 5-star prospect, and distance can be a factor, and distance can be in favor of you, and can get him onto campus quite often from a guy from Arizona. Another guy who I know is visiting this month, I'm not sure if he's 100% visiting for the spring game, is Brandon Baker, offensive lineman out of Mater Dei. Big offensive tackle down there who we had Greg Biggins on the podcast. Eric and I talked to him. He mentioned that Brandon Baker was really high on Oregon, extremely high on Oregon, with Adrian Clem as their offensive line coach. And now that Adrian Clem is gone, it's good that Brandon Baker is coming back to visit. It'll be a huge weekend whenever he does visit for Alik Terry to get into his social circle and start talking to him. I'm sure he already has, but it'll be great to get him on campus and have Alik Terry, diagnose the new plan that they have moving forward for a guy like Brandon Baker's talent. He's the premier offensive tackle on the West Coast this season. You look 2 classes ago, that was Josh Connerly Jr. Oregon landed him. I think that Oregon is in a good position to land Brandon Baker eventually. Who knows where that recruitment takes off, but with the work that Adrian Clem did of just getting Brandon Baker to understand the Oregon brand, understand where the program is headed, I think that's really put them in a good position with him. So he's maybe the most realistic of the unrealistic prospects. But those are my 2 guys. I think those are the easy answers as of now.
We should note with Baker, Clem had to do some sales work, but there's also the history that ties to Oregon. His older brother Gary Baker played here for 5 years, so there's a little history there that gives Oregon an inside track. Maybe I agree with Jared. Like, I don't even think he's unrealistic. I think Oregon will be I think Oregon's right in the middle of that one. Everything that we've kind of read and seen, so that'll be certainly a priority, though, as Jared kind of outlined. That's the top offensive tackle recruit in the country right now, and certainly, probably one of the 2 to 3 to 4 biggest targets on Oregon's board, regardless of position. So a name to know. Matt, anyone else that you want to mention before we move on to the next question?
I just think that they're going to get a couple of their other commits. Jackson Jones is going to be here for an unofficial visit, excuse me. Their in-state prospects are all going to be here. And then I think maybe one to know down the road, which could be pretty wild that we're even having this discussion. Keely Smith Jr.
Yep.
I think he's a 2025 quarterback. Probably gonna be here for the spring game. I've been talking with his dad a while ago, and they mentioned that they were probably coming. I don't know if it's official yet or not, but that would be interesting. And the storylines of that would be pretty crazy.
Yeah, having a legacy recruit of that
at
caliber,
that position.
Yeah, exactly. That's the same name. The dad was pretty darn remarkable as a player, pretty renowned amongst Oregon's fan base. That would be really, we haven't really seen that at Oregon. That would be an interesting one. And gosh, you hope for his sake that he's able to make his own decision in this recruitment. I know Keely probably is dying for him to be in Oregon uniform. I would imagine he's probably grown up, rooting for and watching Oregon. But that will be recruitment, as Matt indicated, pretty far ways off in terms of reaching a conclusion, but one to monitor.
Isn't it interesting that I think the recruiting process has shifted again, where 5-6 years ago it was, hey, you've got to go and start recruiting underclassmen. Like you can't focus strictly on 1 year. And now I think it's almost to the point where it used to be talk to these underclassmen, but still spend a majority of your time on the current class.
Yeah.
I think they're recruiting equally as hard, almost, whether it's Oregon or just college football in general, underclassmen as they are upperclassmen. And the amount of prospects that we're going to see roll through Eugene for that spring game and for all of spring, I think. I mean, as we've been recording this podcast, I know it's not a top 50 recruit or whatever, but 2024 wide receiver, he's a 3-star prospect. He has an offer from Oregon. Malachi Durant just tweeted out, "Hey, I'm spending spring break in Eugene." For duck emojis. Like, just the amount of players that are going to roll through Eugene, whether they're 2024 kids or they're underclassmen in 2025, 2026, or even 2027, in the next 30 days is going to be fascinating. And I just think it's interesting to see how it's shifted again, where if you're not recruiting both classes, both groups heavily, you're going to get left behind. And this is a huge month for Oregon in 2024, but also to set the stage for 2025 and maybe even 2026.
This is why our good friend Marshall Malco has a job. I mean,
very much so.
There are so many prospects to know, and like you throw into it, man. I think you're right in that it's a split between upperclassmen and underclassmen. Well, how about transfer portals and having to be involved in recruiting them? I know you won't be tripping any of them out here during spring because I guess they could theoretically visit, but they couldn't enter the portal again until a couple of days after spring ends. But yeah, no, it is wild how many prospects. And whenever we do have Marshall on the show again, which I hope we get sometime this summer, I don't know if we've ever asked like how many prospects does he have to know at one time and like familiarize himself with, and what kind of confusion there might be of, okay, is it that, say for instance, maybe there's a player with the same name from 2 different parts of the country. I mean, that's the type of stuff you'd be running up against, with which as much work as you have to do on the recruiting angle. So yeah, no, recruiting never stops. We'll have full coverage of that, including over these next couple of weeks when we're out at practice. I would imagine there'll be some recruits out there. We'll do our best to identify and kind of inform who's here for spring. So good one from Robbie to start. We're going to go now to a question from A_Fotef17. What are your thoughts on Oregon's backup quarterback situation? This is kind of an interesting one. I think we've addressed this a little bit, and maybe more than a little bit, but obviously everybody knows what's going on with Bo as a starting quarterback. There's no questions there. This is, by the way, the first time in a while we'll enter a spring without really any questions about who the quarterback will be. And you have to go back to when it was Justin Herbert 2019. So it's been about 4 years, which is kind of wild. So that part is interesting. And then the backups, like, hey, we really don't know, by the way, much of anything about one of them, Austin Novosad. So it's hard for me to have too many thoughts other than physically he looks like he's got a ways to go. I think we've all kind of chimed in on that, needs to add some weight. I don't think he's somebody who can really help right now. Sure, he can maybe get tossed into a game situation if needed and contribute, but I think you'd like to avoid that. And then Ty Thompson, this is probably the only reason we want to answer this question is because he's just such an interesting character to talk about. What is he and what kind of strides can he make? Because physically, I will say it over and over again, he checks all the boxes of what you want. It's just some of the processing stuff and the in-game stuff, which we haven't loved. But I also think it's kind of like, when you only play a certain number of snaps in a season and they're all in mop-up duty, and for whatever reason, they happen over and over every time out there, it seems like something goes wrong. The sense from the fan base of those watching regularly is like he's not very good. So, I mean, what he's shown in games hasn't been incredible, but I still certainly haven't given up on him. Now, to like the question of how would I feel if Bo Nix isn't available? The answer is not very good. But I would also question how many teams in the country would say I feel amazing if my starting quarterback goes down, because in the era of the transfer portal, it's really hard to just carry like 2 to 3 competent quarterbacks at once. And I think Oregon has a competent starting quarterback, and they have a really, really high-end physical tool prospect in Thompson. But we don't really know if there's a guy after Bo who can, frankly, win you football games. And I don't think that's a great situation, but it's not different than or too remarkable compared to most, I think, out there right now.
Yeah, if there is a school that tells you that they're okay with their backup quarterback coming into the game, that means that they don't have a starting quarterback that they rely on. So I think it's pretty simple as that. I don't think there's a lot to answer here. Oregon's backup quarterback situation is the same as it was last year, just with Oz and Novosad. Ty Thompson's the two who Eric just went through, hasn't been great in games, but physically and had all the hype as a recruit coming out of high school. He's there. He seems to be fine in practice. We've heard pretty good things about him in practice. He just hasn't lived up to the hype during any of the games that he's played in, and they've all been, like Eric said, during mop-up time or like the first play after halftime against I forgot what team it was at Washington. No, it wasn't Washington. I can't remember what it was, but just random games like that where he's gotten in. He really hasn't had the chance to, I think, personally control the offense. I think it's all been very scripted and just been really safe plays. Maybe that's because it's on purpose that they don't want Ty throwing the ball down the field, but I don't know. And I don't think, frankly, unless it's a coach that's listening, I don't think a lot of us know whether or not their confidence level in Ty is to just never let him throw the ball during a game. But yeah, and then Novosad is just there. This is a year of development. This is a year of learning. This is a year of needing to add weight. He's a tallish kid, but he's really skinny. He's going to need to add some more weight, some more muscle in order to play at the college level. I think this conversation is better suited like for next year, what the backup quarterback situation is after Bo Nix leaves. For now, it's Bo Nix and then everybody else. And then Ty Thompson is on the top of the list of everybody else. So I think it's more or less the same thing as we had last season.
I think this is a spring where we need to find out what Ty Thompson can do, see what Novosad can do, so that you have a clear idea, kind of, not maybe clear, but you have a good idea of where you're at going into fall camp and whether you need to go after a blue chip. We've talked about this, a blue chip 5-star quarterback, if you can get them, to maybe jump those two or compete with those two, or do you go portal? Do you go both? And frankly, like I think you have to commend Ty Thompson for sticking through it, because so often we see guys just bounce like the first time that they don't have success. I think the fan base has shifted from being fully in support of Ty to now not really having the confidence in Ty, fair or not. And I think it's unfair because we really haven't seen him in game situations, in situations where he's asked to succeed or play with the normal unit. Has he looked good when he's played? No, he hasn't. But I still don't think we really know what he can do yet. And I think that's maybe the biggest concern. To Eric's point, like, yeah, if he goes down, if Bo goes down, then like Oregon's in a world of hurt here. Because you don't know what you have with any of these guys. And so I think it's all about information gathering and trying to see how many game situations you can put these two or one of them in, just so you have a better understanding of what you have, where you have it, going into spring football 2024 after 2023 season's over.
Yeah, I agree with it, by the way. Just last thought, on the Ty thing, it's commendable. I mean, and I get it's funny because we're patting a kid on the back for not transferring after 3 years or whatever, 2 years. But in like today's portal world, like that's not, like it's not that infrequent that that's the case, where a kid shows up and doesn't work out right away and he's at another school across the country, in a blink of an eye. So for Ty to be here, and as Matt said, gosh, what a turn of events in terms of just the fan perception and the way that they have gone from supporting him kind of blindly as the preferred quarterback over Anthony Brown back in 21 to last year. He gets in a couple of times. And again, remember during the offseason, there were definitely we want Ty over Bo. There was some frustration from the fan base in general that they brought in Bo Nix. I remember we did what did we do? One of those live streams, and people were like, why are they adding Bo? Like, we want it to be Ty. We want to develop a player and see it go. And then after this last season, I don't know if it's the same folks, but a lot of people are now echoing he stinks, we don't want him, we'll be better off if he left kind of crowd. So I mean, it's a big year for him. And the ultimate thing that's probably tough is it feels like a big year, but probably not going to have a great idea of his development unless he does get into some games on Saturdays. And so this kind of discussion we're having right now of like, is he good? Is he bad? will probably be ongoing until the fall of 2024, assuming he sticks around. So I guess buckle up. We're going to put this the Ty Thompson train. It'll be rolling, and it could be a rocky ride.
Well, you brought up something that, like, we're so quick to make these swooping assumptions that these guys are going to be really good. The fan base did the same thing with Khalil Ware for Oregon basketball. And instead of just letting guys show up and we get a sense of where they're at, and we get a sense of kind of what their games are like before making these swooping decisions that these guys need to be a starter as a true freshman at the most difficult position in all of sports, which is quarterback. Like that's such a big ask, and so few people do it and then excel at a high level. I mean, what would our perceptions be of Ty Thompson right now if no one had put those lofty expectations that he was going to beat out, Anthony Brown to be the starter as a true freshman, and instead just said, like, let's see where he's at in 2 years? Would we have any kind of concern with him right now? Like, hey, like he's shown youth, he's the inexperience of youth. He's got some things to improve on, but like he's got a rocket. He's mobile. He seems to be a good teammate. I mean, Bo Nix was on one of his social accounts this past week saying, like, the person when he leans to, when he has struggles on the field is Ty Thompson. Like that tells me something about who Ty Thompson is as a person, as a player, as a teammate. Like, I don't think our perception would be negative towards Ty if we just didn't carry these like insane. And when I say we, I'm not saying us three, but just like the perception that this guy had to be a starter on a Power 5 team competing for a conference championship day one, and because he didn't do it, now all of a sudden he's not good. Like so much of our perceptions could be changed if we just took an easy approach to it.
Yeah, of course, but then we all wouldn't have jobs because our company is the one that dictates who has the hype coming out of high school, and that's exactly what Ty Thompson had. Yeah. No, but like everybody's expectations is for him to come in and do so well, because in recent memory, we've had really good quarterbacks come out of high school and compete and start at the collegiate level, like a Trevor Lawrence, like a Justin Fields. I know that those guys are, first round talents, but you hope as a fan that your highly touted quarterback out of high school is going to come in and take over a program that needs a quarterback, which was Oregon. That's what Texas is hoping for in Arch Manning. That's what they hoped for in Quinn Ewers too last season, who looked pretty good before he got hurt. It's what all of these schools look for. And when they don't, they are going to collapse on whoever that poor quarterback is because they didn't live up to expectations, which is unfortunately just how it goes in today's college football world, where if they don't do anything after 2 years, then there's going to be some expectations that, hey, you should move on and leave the school. If Ty Thompson were like a 3-star recruit and looked at the way he did and threw the ball the way he did, we'd all be jumping for joy, hoping that he can turn himself into a starter for year 3 or year 4 in the 2024 season, or hoping that we can see him jump into the game and see what he can do as the 3-star kid from, let's continue that he's from Arizona, just a 3-star kid that Oregon has matured and has taught and has learned under Bo Nix. But it's a different set of expectations when he's a high 4-star, near 5-star coming out of high school.
I mean, I'm just looking at the 2022 rankings, and I'm not trying to discredit like 5-star shouldn't be good. Like that's not the point. But like last year's rank, the 2022 class wasn't particularly special at quarterback. But you look at the group, and only one of these guys basically started, in the top 20 of the rankings. And that was Cade Klubnik, who had to eventually replace DJU midway through the season, or towards the end of the season. I don't know. I just think like we saw such a run in about like a 7 or 8 year span of every year there being 1 or 2 really, really, really good freshman quarterbacks that show up and they're really special. And then that just kind of created this notion that like just because you're a 5-star now, you automatically have to be able to replicate what 1 or 2 guys every year did. And Ty Thompson didn't, so what? Like maybe he turns it on. I don't know. Like I think there's just as equally a chance that he's not good in 2024 as there is that he is good in 2024. But who knows? And I don't know. I think I'm going to change my perspective on him just because we place too lofty on expectations on a freshman to be someone that, doesn't happen every single year.
And kind of to that point, Matt, that is, by the way, why I've shifted. I just think Kingsley was the one that really marked.
I did the same thing with Kingsley.
Me, right? We both were kind of like Kingsley has a chance to start right away, and the guy was out the door by October. And I've kind of since moved back with. I mean, you look at this year and even last year with Josh Connerly, and just kind of going, okay, I don't want to predict a freshman is going to start and be a star right away. And if it turns out he is, that's awesome. But the reality is, even the highest rated guys oftentimes take some time to start. Even Kayvon Thibodeau wasn't an opening day starter and didn't start until midway through the season. The Penei Sewells are often the exception and not the rule. So I do think, just to that point, Matt, I think there is definitely validity of the conversations we have do in some way inform fan conversations. So I'm going to give ourselves a little bit of credit for that, and also mean that there's a little responsibility to not assume a guy is going to be really great off the way. Because I bet if we went back and pulled our podcast clips from when Ty arrived here, I don't think we were saying, gosh, he's going to start right away. But I do think we were like, man, there's a lot of upside here, a lot of excitement, and maybe he can push to start. So I think even we can kind of correct the way we go about presenting young players when they arrive. So.
All right, let's take a quick break, and we come back. We'll wrap up the podcast. All right, welcome back to the Autzen Audibles Podcast. Matt Preem, Jared Mack, Eric Scopel on the show. With a couple questions in. We've got 1 or 2 more to go. Can't remember.
We've got one, Matt. It's a little bit of a quick Monday here. And it's a question from another familiar name. At Prince Puddles asks, is this the best wide receiver room in Oregon history? Depth of talent, standout talents like Franklin, Holden, and young guys like Dickey and Casper. Hard to think of a better wide receiver room than this one. Am I wrong? I think he is wrong. Just like off the top of my head here, 2002 had Sammy Parker, had Keenan Howery, and had Demetrius Williams, who are 3 of the school's 5 all-time leaders in receiving yards and receptions. So I think that's probably at this point, kind of the high water mark, and it's probably hard to hit. I'd also add
those guys were NFL players too.
Yeah, and I think all of those were top. I can't remember. I'm not going to try to. I'm going to date myself because it's been a long time. The guys are 20 years ago. I'm trying to think of where they were drafted. I think they were all like top 4 or 5 round draft picks, but these guys were drafted in like 2003. So I'm not going to go too far out on the limb with trying to remember their draft positioning. But like, yeah, so I don't think, first off, I don't think it's the best. Now, I'd even say like on paper, like there have been some groups that I think were deeper in the past. Now, you could convince me top tier talent if Dickey is ready right away, Franklin's ready right away, and Holden stuff works out like best case, and we like what we see of Tez and Hudson. That could be a really special group. But I don't think so. I think that's a stretch because I don't even know if I think this group is better than like how many, where does this group stack up for you? This is like the 3rd best position group on offense to me behind quarterback and running back.
I could see that. Yeah, no, I don't agree with it either. We have had this literal conversation on this very same podcast 2 years ago with true freshman Dante Thornton, Troy Franklin, Devin Williams, Micah Pittman, Isaiah Crocker, Josh Delgado, Johnny Johnson, Jalen Redd.
Yep.
We, on paper, everybody who was an Oregon fan thought that was the best wide receiving group Oregon has had in the history of their program. And they went out and threw the ball 6 times. So it didn't turn out well. I think that this wide receiver room is extremely talented. They've got the top tier talent in Troy Franklin, who could certainly work himself into like a day 1, probably a day 2 draft pick. Jurion Dickey, we have the 5-star hype around him as well. So we all expect him to do well. But Trayshawn Holden was a good player at Alabama. Tez Johnson was really good at Troy as a slot receiver. Chris Hudson has had some good moments here at Oregon. And then you have other true freshmen like Ashton Kozart, who is another highly rated recruit who, by all accounts, is pretty good. And then Kyler Casper in his sophomore season. So there's a lot of talent on paper, but I don't think it's the best of all time. I mean, on paper, it looks great, but so did that 2021 team. And I would say on paper, that 2021 team looks better than this team.
I would say no. In a large part, Eric, excuse me. Eric brought up probably the group I was going to go with as number one, but a counter to that would be maybe 2014.
I was looking at that too. That's another good one, Matt. Yeah.
Keenan Lowe, Charles Nelson, Devin Allen. You also had Dwayne Stanford, Darren Carrington. Your tight ends had Pharaoh Brown, Johnny Munt, Evan Bayless. All three of those guys made the NFL. Carrington was on track before he got suspended from Oregon and eventually booted. I think Dwayne Stanford had a stint. Keenan Lowe had a stint. Devin Allen's currently in the NFL with some kind of a stint. That was a really special unit. Another one that I would probably go back and look at is the year before, 2013. That group had a lot of the same guys. And on top of that, had Josh Huff and Braylon Addison on the unit as well. Byron Marshall was a receiver in 2014 as well for Oregon. So I would say no. This season's group, though, like on paper, has the potential to be a really good unit because across the board, basically are 4 and 5 star caliber guys at positions, aside from, the occasional Tez Johnson or the occasional Justice Lowe, if maybe he works his way into the rotation. And even he, by some services, was rated as a 4-star. So I think on paper, like this group has the potential to maybe put themselves into that discussion, but that's such a lofty ask for a group of, Troy Franklin's established. I think Hudson's established. Tez is established, but at a different school. Holden's established, but at a different school. And then everybody else, like, Franklin's really the only one that's put up really good numbers. Tez did it, but did it at a group of 5 school. So you have to acknowledge it, but how does that translate to this level? Is it 1 for 1, or is he going to lose some? Is he going to be used as much? Does he have to play as much because the talent he's playing around is better? I don't know. Maybe he does play as much as he did at Troy this season. But there's really only one guy that you can say is like put up really good stats at the highest level of college football. And I feel like if you're going to be in that discussion of greatest of all time, you got to have more than one dude. I don't know what the number is, but you got to have more than one guy that's had like a really special season.
So yeah, that was kind of the counter I was trying to make earlier, and I agree. Like if you look at the school's all-time lists, which again, kind of interesting to look through just in general, but you look at 2002. I mentioned that when you had 3 guys in your top 5. 2013, Matt mentioned it, had Addison and Huff. Those are 2 more guys in the top 8. That's just like the depth of what you're talking about. I think where you could, with this year's group, get to a point where you could say that they need to be considered is if Franklin has a super special year. And like, let's just be honest. Like if you go look at the single season lists, it's kind of amazing. Like if he has 1,200 yards receiving, that's the school record. Mm-hmm. Like that's not that. That's 100 yards per game in a 12-game regular season. And if they play 13, 14, maybe 15, probably not, maybe 15 games, then you'd be looking at like he just has to have like 70 yards per game to get there. So like I think there's probably a decent chance Franklin puts up one of the better individual single season receiving lists because you look at the stats here, like it's not that lofty of a track to pull through. About 75 receptions, 1,200 yards, 13 touchdowns, and there you go. That's the school record basically across the board of what I just mentioned. So I think it's possible Franklin puts up a really big year, but to the point we made earlier, like none of the other guys are really proven here. Hudson's had some success. He's had some moments. I know we're going to get some comments about why we're overlooking him, but that's just every podcast now. But like in general, like the other guys just haven't proven too much. And while I want to be champion Dickey and Casper as exciting young players, I also want to be careful to the point we made earlier of where we're not like, gosh, Dickey and Casper are amazing going into the season, and then neither of them have much of a role. And suddenly we're like, what's wrong with Dickey and Casper? Because that seems to be the trend that we go through when we promote players as being amazing and expecting them to just tear it up their first year. And then when they don't, they become afterthoughts. So, but yeah, no, I think we're all in agreement. This isn't probably going to be the best single season group Oregon's had, but like maybe there's a world where Bo Nix has a Heisman Trophy caliber season and throws the ball all over the yard and sets school records, and we have to, egg on our face.
Like,
yeah.
Should they even be trying to throw it all over the place? Because you have Bucky and Noah who are very, very good at carrying the football while running.
We should call Mario back. It's, hey, Mario, we got all these weapons that you don't need to use.
I mean, I understand, like, yes, you want to throw the football. But, like, to Eric's point, like, should Bo Nix be throwing the ball more than 40 times a game? I don't think so. With the guys that you have at running back.
Oh, no. Yeah, no, absolutely
That's
not.
A lot.
I don't. I did Bo probably threw over 40 times like twice last year, right? Definitely against Washington State because they absolutely needed to. But
yeah,
no, I mean it's a really great offensive attack, and I'm sure we'll get into this over the course of spring ball and what Will Stein brings to the table. But yeah, as long as that offensive line holds up with a lot of newcomers, they'll be able to run, they'll be able to throw, they'll be able to do whatever they want, just like last season. I think it'll be interesting to the end of Eric's point. To come back and look maybe at this question specifically and just be like, okay, these are the wide receiver years that were during X era, so the Will Stein, Kenny Dillingham era, compared to what they were in the Cristobal era, who had similar probably range of talent, and then what it was during the Chip Kelly era, and just to see the disparity in how much Oregon is throwing the ball now versus then, and just the level of talent that they're using, because I think that Dillingham's and hopefully what Stein will bring to the table, I think their offenses are going to be probably run first, but a lot of easy passes, a lot of yards after the catch, and a couple of deep shots a game. And I think it'll be something that Bo Nix doesn't need to throw 40 times. Probably doesn't even need to really throw like 35 or more times, just because it'll just be a lot of easy throws and a lot of easy yards. What do you got for me, Eric?
Both are at 40 times twice. You named one of them, Washington State. The other was against Oregon State. And then on average, about 32 passes per game. It was over 30, though, for about half.
That makes sense. Yeah, to Matt's point, they could probably win if they did do a Mario Cristobal approach and then only let Bo throw 15 times. It just depends how the defense would do on the other side of the ball.
Bo threw it 35 times. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say the only other point. You go ahead. I'll bring it up after.
I was just going to say 35 times attempts in a game this past season. He only did it 5 times. So like, let's set the number there. Like,
yeah,
because if it to get to the like years where you have these receivers that put up just insane numbers and you have more than one do it, you got to have games where it's like the Oregon State game or the Washington State game, because against OSU, Coda went for 136 and Franklin went for 78, and then your third leading receiver was Ferguson with 53 yards. And then against the Cougars, Franklin went for 137 and Coda went for 84, and then Hudson had 72. So like, to get these numbers where you're seeing just really special years from more than one guy, you got to throw it a lot. And I just don't think it's in Oregon's best interest to be throwing even 35 times a game.
The only point I was going to make up, and by the way, I in agreement on all of this in terms of what's in their best interest. The only reason I would pause a little bit is just how good is the offensive line going to be? I know we've been high on it,
sure,
but I think last year so much of that was reliant upon, gosh, we've got some real dudes up front that are experienced. I know that the draft stock isn't fantastic, and gosh, it's possible that none of them get taken, or if they do get taken, it's right at the end. But they're at least experienced guys. This year's group probably has more talent, we think, but certainly less experience together. And then I did want to throw one Jared's way. Matt and I both kind of had some groups that we thought of right away. Was there a group that like when you thought of the best group you've seen at Oregon, was there one that jumped right to your head, Jared? I'm just curious because Matt and I obviously have been watching it a little bit longer. I'm just curious, what was your barometer there?
In terms of just like unbelievable wide receiver core, like just
at Oregon, what was like? Is there one that you're like that was the best I remembered, or is there?
Yeah. It's probably either the 2014 or 2015 team. I mean, those were just dudes. But I mean, it's hard to compare because none of those guys were great NFL players, and
right.
For a lot of what I believe or what I think of when I look back at college wide receiver cores, I'm like, all right, how did they do in the NFL? Like you look back at the Miami teams and like the 80s and the early 00s. Those were elite guys in college and elite guys in the NFL. But granted, that was like the whole Chip Kelly thing where they had really great guys in college and then not a lot of unbelievable talent in the NFL, at least from an offensive perspective. But those teams in the 2014, 2015, especially with Vernon Adams, those were some of the guys that I thought were really great receivers for Oregon, but they were a lot of short yardages, yards after catch, similar to what Oregon has been doing the last two seasons. So I guess that's it for me specifically.
All right. Then I guess that does it for us here on the podcast. All right. Thank you for listening. Thank you for submitting the questions. As always, we'll be back at practice on Tuesday with a Wednesday breakdown of what we learned from day 3 of 15 total days of spring football during this season. 13 of those days will come during April. So big month for Oregon football on the practice field. We'll be there to cover it all. So that will be on the show next. And until then, you've been listening to the Autzen Audibles Podcast.
Talk to you later, folks.
Peace.